I felt it the moment I walked into the office that Tuesday morning. The air was different. Colder. Angela from HR barely nodded when I passed her desk, and her usual chatty emails had become one-line responses overnight. Last week, I'd submitted a formal complaint about payroll errors affecting 3 departments. Not small mistakes either. We're talking thousands of dollars in overtime calculations that somehow kept disappearing from people's paychecks. Angela had scheduled a quick meeting, dismissed my concerns as minor accounting hiccups, and promised to look into it. That was 6 days ago. Radio silence since then. But I wasn't just sitting around waiting. I'd been quietly documenting everything. Screenshots of payroll systems, copies of timesheets, emails showing the discrepancies. All safely stored on an encrypted drive at home. My stomach twisted as I opened my laptop. Another meeting request had appeared in my inbox. Today, 3 p.m. Subject line. Follow-up discussion. No details, no agenda, just those 2 words that made my pulse quicken. I'd been through corporate restructures before. I knew what vague meeting requests usually meant. But this time I was ready. Whatever Angela had planned, she had no idea how thoroughly I'd prepared for this moment. At exactly 3 p.m., I knocked on Angela's office door. She looked up from her computer with that practiced, neutral expression HR people perfect over years of delivering bad news. Her desk was unusually clean, with just one manila folder sitting directly in front of her chair. That folder had my name written on the tab. "Please sit down," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. I settled in, keeping my breathing steady. Angela opened the folder and slid a single sheet of paper toward me. It was my complaint form from last week, with red ink scrawled across the bottom. "Reviewed, no action required, H." "I've looked into your concerns," Angela said, her tone flat and rehearsed. "Our accounting department ran a full audit of the payroll systems. Everything checks out. No discrepancies found." She tapped the paper with her pen. "Your complaint has been officially closed." I nodded slowly, fighting the urge to argue. Instead, I smiled politely and asked, "Would it be possible to get copies of that audit report? And maybe the full email thread between departments? I'd like to update my records." Angela's eyes flickered with something that looked like irritation. "That's unusual. We don't normally provide internal audit details to employees." "I understand," I replied, keeping my voice calm. "But I'd really appreciate having the documentation. For my own peace of mind." Angela hesitated for a long moment, clearly wrestling with my request. Finally, she pulled out her phone and sent a quick text. Within minutes, her assistant knocked and handed her a thick stack of papers. Angela flipped through them quickly, then slid the entire pile across her desk. "Here," she said curtly. "Everything from the past 2 weeks regarding your complaint. Email threads, audit summaries, the works." She leaned back in her chair. "I hope this resolves your concerns once and for all." I thanked her and gathered the papers, tucking them carefully into my bag. Walking back to my desk, I could feel Angela watching me through her office window. Let her watch. She had just handed me exactly what I needed, though she didn't know it yet. Back at my desk, I spread the documents across my workspace and began reading carefully. Every email, every dismissive response, every time my concerns had been brushed aside was right there in black and white. Angela's assistant had included everything, including internal messages I was never supposed to see. Messages where Angela called my complaint frivolous and suggested I was making problems where none exist. I photographed every page with my phone, then uploaded everything to my secure cloud storage. The paper trail was now complete, and it painted a very different picture than what Angela had just told me in her office. Over the next few days, I maintained my normal routine while quietly building my case. I arrived on time, completed my projects, attended meetings, and smiled politely at everyone. But underneath the surface, I was methodically documenting every interaction with HR, every delayed response, every sign that my complaint was being actively suppressed rather than investigated. Wednesday morning brought the first crack in Angela's armor. I'd sent a follow-up email asking for clarification on one point from the audit report. Instead of her usual quick reply, I waited all day for a response. When it finally came, it was just 2 sentences. The matter is closed. Please direct any further questions to your direct supervisor. That afternoon, I made copies of everything and stored them in 3 different locations. One set went to a safety deposit box, another to my home office safe, and the third to my sister, who lived across town. I wasn't being paranoid. I was being thorough. Thursday evening, I researched employment law and workers' rights. I found a legal aid website that offered free consultations for workplace issues. Their online form asked for detailed documentation of the problem. Perfect. I had plenty of that. By Friday, I'd submitted my case to the legal aid office, attaching every email, every photo, every piece of evidence I'd collected. The automatic reply said I'd hear back within 5 to 7 business days. The following Monday changed everything. Angela's assistant called me into HR first thing in the morning. I found Angela pacing behind her desk, a look of barely controlled panic on her face. She had her phone pressed to her ear and was saying things like, "Yes, I understand," and "We'll get that to you immediately." When she hung up, she turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before. Fear. "I need you to confirm something," she said, her voice tight. "Last week, when I gave you those documents, were they complete? Was every email included in what you received?" I nodded calmly. Yes, everything looked complete to me. Why? Angela's face went pale. Because we just received a formal request from the State Labor Board. They want the full email thread regarding your complaint. Every message, every response, every internal communication. She stared at me. Did you file a formal complaint with the state? I met her gaze steadily. I exercised my right to seek clarification on workplace policies. Everything I did was completely legal and proper. Angela sank into her chair. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked completely out of control. "They want everything by the end of the week," she muttered. "Every single communication." I smiled politely. "Well, at least you already have it all organized. That should make it easier." The irony wasn't lost on me. Angela had given me the rope, and now she was realizing I knew exactly how to use it. Word travels fast in small offices. By Tuesday afternoon, whispers were floating through the hallways about state investigators and labor board inquiries. People kept glancing at me with mixtures of curiosity and respect. I could see them doing the math, figuring out that the quiet woman from accounting had somehow managed to get the attention of people who could make Angela sweat. I spent my lunch break organizing my evidence one more time. The legal aid office had called that morning to say they'd reviewed my submission and were forwarding it to a labor attorney who specialized in workplace retaliation cases. They were impressed with my documentation and said it was one of the most thorough complaint packages they'd seen. Angela avoided me completely. She took longer routes through the office to avoid passing my desk, and her assistant was now handling all communication with me. I continued my work as normal, but I could feel the shift in power dynamics. People who used to ignore me were suddenly very interested in being friendly. Wednesday brought a new development. The CEO himself, Harold Brennan, stopped by my desk. He'd never spoken to me directly in the 3 years I'd worked here. "I understand you've been having some concerns about our payroll systems," he said, trying to sound casual. "I want you to know we take these things very seriously." I looked up from my computer and smiled. "I appreciate that, Mr. Brennan. I'm confident everything will be resolved properly." Thursday morning, I received an email that made my heart race. It was from attorney Patricia Wells of Wells and Associates, specializing in employment law. She'd reviewed my case and wanted to schedule a phone consultation. The subject line read, "Strong case. Let's discuss next steps." I called during my lunch break from my car in the parking lot. Patricia was direct and professional. "Your documentation is excellent," she said. "This isn't just about payroll errors. Based on what you've shown me, there's a pattern of systematic suppression of legitimate workplace complaints. That's illegal retaliation, and companies pay significant penalties for it." She explained that the State Labor Board was now obligated to conduct a full investigation. Angela would have to produce every email, every document, every communication related to my complaint and how it was handled. If they found evidence of retaliation or suppression, the fines could reach 6 figures. The beautiful thing, Patricia continued, is that they already gave you all the evidence we need. Angela handed you the proof of their own misconduct. I've seen executives make stupid mistakes before, but this is remarkable. I hung up feeling like I was floating. Angela had been so concerned with getting me to shut up and go away that she'd handed me the ammunition to bring down her entire system of ignoring employee concerns. Friday arrived with the kind of tension that makes everyone whisper. Angela's office had been a revolving door of panicked meetings all week. I watched through the glass walls as she gestured frantically at documents spread across her desk, with Harold Brennan looking increasingly grim beside her. At 2 p.m., my phone rang. It was Patricia Wells. The labor board completed their preliminary review, she said. They found sufficient evidence to launch a full investigation. Angela and the company have been formally notified. They have 30 days to provide complete documentation and submit to interviews. My hands were shaking as I wrote down the details. Patricia explained that the investigation would examine not just my case, but the entire HR department's handling of employee complaints over the past 2 years. If they found a pattern of suppression, every affected employee could be entitled to compensation. This is going to get very big very quickly, she warned. Companies don't like labor investigations. They'll likely want to settle before it goes further. But that's entirely up to you. After I hung up, I sat quietly at my desk, pretending to work while my mind raced. 3 weeks ago, I'd been a powerless employee whose concerns were brushed aside. Now I was at the center of a state investigation that could fundamentally change how this company operated. Angela walked past my desk without making eye contact, her face tight with stress. The hunter had become the hunted. Monday morning brought a new reality to our office. 2 official-looking people in dark suits sat in the conference room, laptops open, taking notes while Harold Brennan and Angela answered questions. The State Labor Board investigators had arrived. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. They called me this morning. Want to schedule settlement discussions. You rattled them badly. I found myself smiling as I replied, not interested in settling yet. Let's see what the investigation finds first. The truth was, I wasn't angry anymore. I was fascinated. Watching Angela scramble to produce documentation, seeing Harold pace nervously outside the conference room, observing how quickly the power structure had shifted, it was like watching a masterclass in corporate consequences. One of the investigators, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, stopped by my desk around noon. Miss Taylor, I'm Jane Morrison with the State Labor Board. I understand you're the employee who filed the initial complaint. I nodded. Yes, though it started as just a simple payroll concern. She smiled slightly. Simple concerns often uncover bigger problems. Your documentation has been very helpful. We'll likely need to interview you formally next week, but I want you to know that your attention to detail has made our job much easier. The formal interview took place the following Tuesday in a conference room I'd never been allowed to use before. 2 investigators sat across from me with recording equipment, asking methodical questions about every aspect of my experience with HR. I answered honestly, referring to my organized notes and timeline. They were particularly interested in the moment Angela had dismissed my concerns and then later provided me with the documents that proved her own misconduct. In your opinion, one investigator asked, do you believe your complaint was handled in good faith? I chose my words carefully. Based on the documentation and the timeline, it appears my complaint was dismissed without proper investigation, despite clear evidence of problems that affected multiple employees. After the interview, Patricia called with an update. The company's lawyers contacted me again. They're very eager to settle. They've seen enough of the investigation to know they're in serious trouble. She paused. They're offering full back pay for all affected employees, policy changes for complaint handling, and a significant settlement for you personally, plus your job security and a promotion. I was quiet for a moment. What do you think? I think you've already won, she said. The question now is how complete you want that victory to be. Wednesday morning, Angela requested a private meeting with me. For the first time in weeks, she looked me directly in the eye when I entered her office. Her usual confidence was completely gone, replaced by something that looked almost like respect. I want to apologize, she said without preamble. "I made a serious error in judgment when I dismissed your complaint. I should have investigated properly from the beginning." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. "The investigation has revealed some problems with how we've been handling employee concerns. Problems I didn't realize existed." She took a shaky breath. "I'm going to be honest with you. My job is probably over. But before I go, I want to make sure this gets fixed." She slid a folder across her desk. "These are the new policies we're implementing. Every employee complaint will now be tracked, investigated by external auditors, and resolved within 30 days. No exceptions." I opened the folder and scanned the documents. They were comprehensive, detailed, and exactly what should have been in place all along. "The state investigators were impressed with your professionalism throughout this process," Angela continued. "You could have made this ugly, but you chose to follow proper channels and document everything carefully. That took integrity." For a moment, she almost looked like she might cry. "I'm sorry I didn't listen to you from the beginning." Thursday brought the news I'd been expecting. Harold Brennan called an all-hands meeting to announce that Angela was pursuing other opportunities and would be leaving at the end of the week. He also announced the new complaint resolution policies and promised that employee concerns would be taken seriously going forward. After the meeting, he approached me privately. "I owe you an apology as well," he said. "You tried to bring a legitimate problem to our attention, and our system failed you. That's on me as much as anyone." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "I'd like to offer you Angela's position, actually. We need someone in HR who understands the importance of listening to employees and handling their concerns properly. Your documentation and professionalism throughout this situation prove you have exactly the skills we need." I was stunned. 3 weeks ago, Angela had dismissed my complaint as frivolous. Now I was being offered her job. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Brennan, but I need some time to think about it." He nodded. "Of course. Take all the time you need. And regardless of what you decide about the position, I want you to know that your actions have made this a better place to work for everyone." Patricia called that afternoon with the final settlement offer: 6-figure compensation, guaranteed job security, and the option to take over HR if I wanted it. Friday was Angela's last day. She spent most of it cleaning out her office and transferring files to the temporary HR manager. I watched her pack her personal items into boxes, feeling a strange mixture of sympathy and satisfaction. Around 4 p.m., she stopped by my desk one final time. "I wanted to thank you," she said quietly. "I know that probably sounds strange, but you did the right thing. You forced us to confront problems we were ignoring, and that takes courage." She held out her hand. "I hope you'll consider taking the HR position. This place needs someone like you." I shook her hand. "I hope your next job works out better." After she left, I sat at my desk thinking about the past month. I'd gone from ignored employee to corporate reformer simply by refusing to accept no as an answer to legitimate concerns. I hadn't raised my voice, hadn't made threats, hadn't done anything dramatic. I'd just documented everything and followed proper channels. The quiet approach had been more powerful than any confrontation could have been. Over the weekend, I made my decision. I called Patricia and told her I was ready to accept the settlement and take the HR position. It was time to make sure other employees never had to go through what I'd experienced. Monday morning, I'd start my new job as Director of Human Resources, armed with the knowledge of exactly how not to handle employee complaints. My first day as Interim HR Director was surreal. I sat behind the same desk where Angela had dismissed my complaints 3 weeks earlier, looking at the same files that had once contained evidence of her misconduct. The irony wasn't lost on me. My first task was reviewing all pending employee complaints that had been sitting in Angela's files. There were 11 of them, some dating back 6 months. Each one told a similar story: legitimate workplace concerns that had been minimally investigated or outright ignored. I spent the morning calling each employee personally, apologizing for the delays, and scheduling proper meetings to address their issues. Their surprise was audible over the phone. Most had assumed their complaints would never be resolved. By noon, word had spread throughout the office. The woman who'd taken down Angela was now running HR, and she was actually returning phone calls about complaints. The atmosphere felt different, hopeful in a way it hadn't before. Harold stopped by around 2 p.m. "How's the first day going?" I gestured to the stack of complaint files. "Eye-opening. We have a lot of work to do to rebuild trust." He nodded grimly. "Whatever you need to make that happen, you have my full support. Budget, staff, policy changes, whatever it takes." The state investigators were due back next week for their final review. I intended to show them a completely transformed HR department. Over the next several days, I worked through the backlog of complaints with methodical attention. Each case received a thorough investigation, proper documentation, and a clear resolution timeline. Some required policy changes, others needed additional training for supervisors, and a few revealed problems serious enough to involve legal counsel. The employees I met with were initially wary, understandably so, given their previous experiences with HR. But as I listened carefully to their concerns, took detailed notes, and followed up promptly with action plans, I could see their skepticism transforming into cautious optimism. One case particularly struck me. A maintenance worker named Carlos had been reporting safety violations for months. His concerns had been filed away and forgotten, despite the fact that someone could have been seriously injured. I immediately brought in safety inspectors and discovered he'd been absolutely right. There were multiple code violations that required immediate attention. Carlos looked shocked when I called to tell him the repairs were already underway. "I thought nobody cared about what we said down here," he admitted. "Everyone's voice matters," I told him. "That's going to be our new standard." Word of these resolutions spread quickly through the office. People began approaching me directly, with concerns they'd been hesitant to report before. The state investigators returned on Wednesday for their final assessment. I met with them in the same conference room where they'd interviewed me weeks earlier, but now the dynamic was completely different. I was no longer the employee seeking justice. I was the HR director responsible for ensuring it. They reviewed my case files, interviewed several employees whose complaints I'd resolved, and examined the new policies we'd implemented. Their assessment was thorough and professional. "The transformation is remarkable," Jane Morrison told me at the end of their visit. "In 3 weeks, you've addressed more employee concerns than were resolved in the previous 6 months. The new complaint tracking system is exactly what we'd recommended."
She paused.
"This is how workplace complaint systems should function. Every employee concern documented, investigated promptly, and resolved with clear communication throughout the process." Their final report would commend the company for its rapid and comprehensive response to the investigation. More importantly, it would serve as a case study for other companies on how to properly handle employee concerns. Patricia called that afternoon with news that the settlement was finalized. The company had agreed to pay penalties to the state and implement the new policies permanently.
My
personal settlement was more than I'd ever imagined when I first reported those payroll discrepancies. A month into my new role, I established regular, open-door sessions where employees could bring concerns directly to me without fear of retaliation. The response was overwhelming. People had been storing up issues for months, waiting for someone who would actually listen. Each session reinforced how badly the previous system had failed. Employees told stories of ignored safety concerns, unreported harassment, and legitimate complaints that had been buried in bureaucratic delays. It was clear that Angela's dismissive approach had been the tip of a much larger iceberg. But alongside the serious issues, I also heard something else: gratitude. Employees thanked me for taking their concerns seriously, for following up promptly, and for creating a system where their voices actually mattered. Harold attended one of my weekly progress meetings with obvious relief. "Employee satisfaction scores have improved dramatically," he reported. "We're getting positive feedback about HR for the first time in years." Several people specifically mentioned feeling heard and respected. I nodded. When people know their concerns will be taken seriously, they're more likely to speak up about problems before they become crises. The transformation wasn't just about resolving individual complaints. It was about changing the entire culture of how we handled employee relations. 3 months later, I received a call that brought everything full circle. It was from the State Labor Board, asking if I'd be interested in speaking at a conference about workplace complaint resolution. They wanted to use our company's transformation as an example of best practices. Standing at the podium, Looking out at an audience of HR directors and corporate executives, I thought about how far I'd come from that first dismissed payroll complaint. The most important lesson I learned, I told the audience, is that employee complaints aren't problems to be managed, they're opportunities to improve. When workers feel safe raising legitimate concerns, and when those concerns are handled promptly and fairly, everyone benefits. I shared the statistics from our transformation. Complaint resolution time had decreased from months to days. Employee satisfaction had increased by 40%, and we'd identified and fixed dozens of problems that could have become serious legal issues. After my presentation, several executives approached me with questions about implementing similar changes at their companies. One woman thanked me for showing that it was possible to create a workplace where employees truly felt heard. Driving home that evening, I reflected on the unexpected journey from dismissed employee to corporate speaker. It had all started with a simple refusal to accept "no action required" as an answer to legitimate concerns. 6 months into my role as HR director, I received a letter that made me smile. It was from Angela, writing from her new position at a nonprofit organization. She'd taken a pay cut to work there, but said she was happier than she'd been in years. "Your persistence taught me something important about leadership," she wrote. "I spent so much time trying to manage problems that I forgot my job was to solve them. My new role is in employee advocacy, and I find myself asking, what would Michelle do when faced with difficult situations?" She thanked me for handling our situation with professionalism and for showing her a better way to approach employee relations. The letter felt like a final piece of closure to our conflict. That same week, I hired 2 new HR associates, both with backgrounds in employee advocacy and conflict resolution. The department was growing to meet the increased demand from employees who finally felt comfortable bringing their concerns forward. One of my new hires, trained in workplace mediation, helped me establish a peer resolution program where employees could address interpersonal conflicts before they escalated to formal complaints. Another specialized in safety compliance and began conducting proactive workplace inspections to identify problems before they caused injuries. The transformation from reactive complaint handling to proactive employee advocacy was complete. A year after filing my original payroll complaint, I stood in the same office where Angela had once dismissed my concerns, now completely transformed. The walls displayed our new mission statement, "Every employee voice matters," and charts showing our improved response times and satisfaction scores. Carlos, the maintenance worker whose safety concerns had been ignored for months, stopped by my office with an update. The repairs I'd authorized had prevented what could have been a serious accident when a pipe burst in exactly the location he'd flagged as problematic. "Thank you for listening," he said simply. "I know my wife sleeps better at night knowing someone cares about keeping us safe at work." These moments reminded me why the transformation had been so important. It wasn't just about policies and procedures. It was about creating a workplace where people felt valued and protected. Harold asked me to present our success story to the board of directors, highlighting how proper complaint handling had improved both employee satisfaction and the company's legal standing. The board approved budget increases for HR staff and training, cementing the changes permanently. Looking at the faces around that boardroom table, I realized that my quiet persistence had accomplished something I never could have imagined, changing an entire corporate culture from the inside out. 18 months later, I received recognition from the State Labor Board for excellence in employee relations. The award ceremony felt surreal, being honored by the same organization whose investigation had started as a result of my complaint about payroll discrepancies. In my acceptance speech, I emphasized that the real heroes were the employees who'd had the courage to speak up about workplace problems, often despite fear of retaliation. "Every complaint is a gift," I told the audience. "It's an employee caring enough about their workplace to point out problems that need fixing. When we treat complaints as opportunities rather than annoyances, everyone wins." The local business journal ran a feature story about our company's transformation, using it as a model for other organizations struggling with employee relations. They interviewed several employees who'd had complaints resolved under the new system, all expressing gratitude for being heard and taken seriously. Reading those interviews, I felt proud not just of what I'd accomplished, but of what we'd all accomplished together. The culture change hadn't been imposed from above. It had grown organically as employees learned they could trust the complaint resolution process. Patricia called to congratulate me on the article. "You've done something remarkable," she said. "You've proven that one person's refusal to accept unfair treatment can transform an entire organization." 2 years after that first dismissed complaint, I was invited to join a statewide task force on workplace rights, helping to develop new standards for complaint resolution across all industries. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman whose concerns had once been brushed aside was now helping to write the policies that would protect other workers. The task force brought together labor advocates, business leaders, and legal experts to create frameworks that balanced employee protection with operational efficiency. My real-world experience with complaint resolution gave me unique insight into what actually worked versus what looked good on paper. During one meeting, a business owner complained that employee complaint systems were too burdensome and expensive to implement properly. "I understand the concern about costs," I responded, "but the cost of ignoring legitimate complaints is much higher. Legal fees, settlement payments, employee turnover, damaged reputation. Proper complaint handling is actually a business investment." I shared statistics from our company showing how proactive complaint resolution had reduced turnover by 30% and eliminated the legal costs associated with unresolved employee issues. The task force's final recommendations included many elements from our successful transformation, ensuring that other workers would benefit from the lessons we'd learned. 3 years later, I received a call that brought my journey full circle. It was from a worker at another company who'd heard about our transformation and was facing similar dismissal of legitimate workplace concerns. "I read about what you did," she said nervously. "I don't know if I'm brave enough to go through what you went through, but I can't keep watching people get hurt because nobody will listen to safety complaints." I spent an hour on the phone with her, walking through the documentation process, explaining her legal rights, and providing contact information for advocacy resources. Most importantly, I assured her that she had the right to expect her concerns to be taken seriously. "You don't have to be brave," I told her. "You just have to be persistent and thorough. Document everything, follow proper channels, and don't let anyone convince you that legitimate concerns aren't worth pursuing." 2 months later, she called back with an update. Her complaints had been properly investigated, safety violations had been corrected, and her company had implemented new policies for handling employee concerns. She'd achieved the same kind of transformation I had, just by refusing to accept dismissal of legitimate workplace problems. These calls came regularly now, workers who'd heard our story and found the courage to speak up about problems in their own workplaces. Each success felt like validation that the painful process I'd gone through had been worthwhile. 5 years after filing that first payroll complaint, I stood before another audience of business leaders, this time as the keynote speaker at a national conference on workplace culture. The theme was the power of listening, and I was there to share how one dismissed complaint had transformed an entire organization. "Change doesn't always require revolution," I told the audience. "Sometimes it just requires one person who refuses to accept that legitimate problems should be ignored, and an organization willing to learn from its mistakes." I shared the complete story, from dismissed complaint to state investigation to cultural transformation. The audience was particularly interested in the practical steps: how to document concerns properly, how to follow legal channels, and how to persist without becoming confrontational. During the Q&A session, one executive asked, "What would you say to employees who are afraid to speak up about workplace problems?" "I'd say that staying silent doesn't protect you. It just allows problems to continue and often get worse. But I'd also say to be smart about it. Document everything, understand your rights, and don't go it alone. There are resources available to help workers navigate these situations safely." The conference organizers later told me it was one of the most impactful presentations they'd hosted, with many attendees requesting follow-up materials about implementing better complaint resolution systems. Looking back on that journey from dismissed employee to workplace advocate, I'm struck by how much changed simply because I refused to accept "no action required" as the final answer to a legitimate concern. That first payroll complaint had seemed so small at the time, but it had revealed a system-wide failure to listen to employees. The transformation wasn't really about me versus Angela or even about one company's policies. It was about the fundamental principle that every worker deserves to have legitimate concerns taken seriously and addressed promptly. When that principle is honored, everyone benefits. Employees feel valued and protected, companies avoid legal problems and improve their operations, and workplace culture becomes healthier overall. I still work as HR director, still hold those weekly open-door sessions, still personally review every complaint to ensure it's handled properly. The difference is that now it feels routine rather than revolutionary. Listening to employees, investigating their concerns, and resolving problems quickly has become just how we operate. Sometimes people ask if I regret the stress and uncertainty of those early weeks when everything was in flux. The answer is always no. That temporary discomfort led to permanent change that has improved working conditions for hundreds of people. The most important lesson I learned is that persistence and preparation can accomplish more than confrontation ever could. Angela had dismissed my complaint because she thought I'd eventually give up and go away. Instead, I documented everything, followed proper channels, and let the evidence speak for itself. In the end, the quiet approach proved more powerful than any dramatic confrontation could have been.